So we're marking the 75th anniversary of the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. Barrie Wilkinson, you've been involved almost from the start.
Yeah, it's a very long time, really. I first came down to Gibraltar Point when I was a youngster of 12 on a family picnic. And it was quite, you could drive anywhere then. There was a track, you could take a car down, no gates. So we picnicked near the bird observatory, and I went to see what they were doing. And they were catching birds and ringing them, and I saw whitethroats for the first time. And that just amazed me to see a bird in the hand. I'd always been interested in the natural world, but to see something like that, really close to. And so when we got home, I asked my parents to make inquiries to see if I could come down. They said, well, he's perhaps a bit young, better wait until he's 15. So I left school at 15, and that July I went on my bike, and that was it, the start of my journey with the Trust, really.
So going back to the Trust, what did you get involved with to start with?
Well, it was really the bird observatory itself. There was accommodation in an old caravan on the car park where the car park now is, and people used to stay for a week and watch bird migration and record in the log and that sort of thing. And I helped with that, and we used to ring birds and release them, of course, and then do general watching the migration. And remember one thing we did was, across the river there was a place called the barge pool where some old barges were laid up, and swallows used to nest in those. And it was quite an adventure to go there and go to the barges and ring them in the nests. And that was one of the things that happened in the summer.
What was there in terms of a centre? Was there a building there at all?
It was an old army building, which when the Trust started in 1949, a local chap by the name of Frank Bean, he was a builder by trade. And he did a huge lot of work on it to sort of get it fit to use. A couple of camp beds in there, you could sleep overnight, sort of thing, prime a stove to cook your meal on, etc. And that's all there was that was the first the Trust's first occupation, if you like, of a building. And a lot of work was done from there. And it was such an interesting place that so many people in the scientific world wanted to come and see this new reserve. So Professor Lane King from Nottingham University, she's a geographer. She was very interested in the physical attributes of the site, and she used to come and stay there. There's a little building at the side of it. It used to be for storage, and we called it the Cathedral because of its shape. And she used to sleep in there. She slept in there one January night. She was so cute, and she mapped all the reserve and found out how the sandspits worked, how they evolved, and how Gibraltar Point came into being.
One of the key names that we keep coming back to when we talk about the Wildlife Trust is Ted Smith, and he's somebody that you knew and really was a great inspiration for you, wasn't he?
He was there on that day when I was 12. His wife Mary was with him, and yes, that's when I first met him. And he was a huge inspiration to me, really. When I went to the bird observatory, initially I started to meet people who obviously came to stay there. Then I met a few local people, and they were attending something they called the evening classes, Ted Smith's evening classes, which he used to use as an extramural lecturer. And I thought, can I go to these? One day they were going somewhere exciting called Scotland Common, and I went off with them for that day, and it was just amazing to see another reserve away from Gibraltar Point, because it was a brand new reserve then, bought in 1954. And I said, can I attend the class? And because I was so young, he had to have classes, ask his members whether they mind if I joined. Anyway, they took me on board. And that was where I really started learning things, really, and going out with him on nature reserves and looking at sites which would one day become nature reserves. And the trouble was there's so many places were disappearing at that time, some of the really good natural history, the good natural areas, that it's very important to try and make a start.
What are your memories then of Ted and how he inspired you? What sort of person was he?
He's very quiet. he's very good at judging people, and he must have thought that probably I was worth encouraging, so that was nice. But he was very even-mannered and very helpful person.
And of course, his wife Mary, you mentioned, was a great support to Ted through his whole time with the Trust.
Absolutely, yes, that's right. Yes, I believe they met on Bird Observatory, I think at the island of Lundy, where they met initially. And they lived in Alford, in Willoughby, at a house called Pie Wipes. And of course he was down fairly frequently, but his main job was the extramural lecturer and the organiser of evening classes for Nottingham University in Lincolnshire. And but he came down to Gib quite a bit at that time.
And Mary, she had a keen interest in wildlife and nature, mainly from the artistic point of view.
Yeah, she was a very, very good artist. She was beautiful drawings of plants, which was her speciality, and she illustrated several books, I think, which they're really nice.
Tell me a bit more about your time with the Trust and how your work there started and then developed.
Well, of course, I was still an apprentice electrician but what came along eventually was National Service. That happened in 1958. And I went into the RAF for 4 years to keep my trade, as it were. And when I came out of the RAF, I lived in Skegness and just picked up where I left off at Gibraltar Point. And it was sometime in 1964, Ted approached me and asked if I would like to work for the Trust. And of course I jumped at the idea. And he managed to get some money for a three-year employment. And for that I was to do research on to visitors and why they came and what they did, and build up a picture of our visitors to Gibraltar Point. So that was my first job, really. Although my very first job, when I started work in April '65, was to paint the walls of the dining room, because we'd just moved into the Coast Guard house then, so it had got its new extension as well, and so it was looking very good.
Have they had more coats of paint since then, do you think?
Oh, a lot more, I think. The other thing I did in that first year, there was a British Trust for Ornithology were running a course and doing a common bird census of the area. That's where normally the common bird census is done over a period of April to June, over 8 visits to farmland, and you record where birds are singing and moving to. And this was the first time it had been done over a week on a site, and they did it to try and get some idea of the bird population of Gib, and it was very successful. But for that they needed a map to find their way about. So I used an old Ordnance Survey map, large scale, and I had to build up a grid, a 200-foot grid on this particular bit of the reserve, and then stick a large white cane on the grid point so they could find their way around in when they were recording birds. So I had to teach myself survey work, really, with three large sticks to get a straight line.
Was most of the time that you have worked and volunteered with the Trust been at Gibraltar Point, or have you moved around the county?
No, it was really mainly Gibraltar Point, and that because it's so close to home. But I had visited a lot of other reserves over a period of time. So I knew what was going on in those areas. And
just looking back over 75 years of the Trust, how do you think it's developed over those years?
Well, it's just amazing now when you think of the number of the members, and it's really grown, and it's probably quite influential now. I think initially, I don't know, it was quite low numbers. It was a dozen or so people, perhaps initially. Ted always says I think they charged 10 shillings, 50p in the early days, and so it was. Well, I suppose 10 shillings was quite a bit then.
Yeah. And what about the early days of trying to encourage people to take an interest in wildlife and nature? Were people generally curious about visiting places like Gibraltar Point?
Well, I think that was part of my remit, really, when I started doing the surveys and asking why people came, why you come here. And a lot of people just come, they were inquisitive. Often they just used to come for a walk, but quite a lot were amazed that this place called Gibraltar Point existed just 3 miles from Skegness, and you still get that today. They just can't believe that there's this wild area so close to a resort. A lot of people come from the Midlands, of course, and Leicestershire, and the county itself. But there were a lot of them showed quite a bit of interest in the wildlife, yes.
And you've actually been recognised for some of the work that you've been involved with as well. You won the Cadbury Medal a couple of years ago, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. That was really a huge surprise.
And what was that in honour of?
I think it just awards my work in conservation, and perhaps in involving people in it, in gaining their interest in nature conservation.
Well, you are still a volunteer now. We're in the grounds of Bannervalham House in Horncastle, the headquarters of the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. What do you do as a volunteer now?
Well, I still go down to Gibraltar Point every day. I'm not quite as active as I used to be, but I do recording there when I visit the bird hides and that sort of thing. And I'm always very keen what's going on with the management and what's happening on the reserve. So I keep my hand in, as it were.
Excellent. And obviously you're wishing the Wildlife Trust well in its 75th anniversary.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.